Hello everyone, my name is Didar and I'm an animator. Right now the world feels pretty chaotic and the animation industry is on fire because of AI. So, since no one really knows what the future will look like, I decided to start creating fun animations based on everything I like just for fun. The first on my long list was Kirby. So, together with a friend, we made a fan animation about him. And in this video, I want to share with you how it was created. And if you don't know who this little pink ball is, let me tell you a little bit about him. Kirby is the main character in a series of video games from Nintendo. He first appeared in 1992 in the game Kirby's Dream Land. His most famous feature, aside from his cuteness, is his ability to inhale enemies and copy their powers. So, here's the idea. What if the two-dimensional Kirby inhaled a three-dimensional object and by copying its properties transformed into 3D himself? And with this idea in mind, I began storyboarding. For me, storyboarding is the most interesting stage, as it allows me to draw freely and experiment with the compositions, to push the story's potential. During the storyboard phase, it's important to solve as many technical and storytelling problems as possible. The more thoroughly this is worked out now, the easier it'll be to animate later. I usually draw storyboards in Photoshop, but Krita, Procreate, Clip Studio Paint and any other drawing program will work just fine. I prefer a vertical format for my storyboards, because it's easier for me to read the sequence of frames. If you are a beginner, I recommend you trying out a few templates and choosing the right format that feels most comfortable for you to work with. Always make sure the aspect ratio of your storyboard panels matches the format you'll use in the final movie. For example, if your movie will be 16:9, but your panels are square, you'll have to redo the compositions later, because a square layout won't work for a wide frame, so always do storyboard in the correct aspect ratio from the beginning. Usually after storyboarding I go straight to the animatic, but in this project Kirby needs to become fully 3D in the final shot. So I decided to try modeling and rigging him first. I could easily buy or download already existing rigs of Kirby, but I wanted to do everything myself to improve my skills and to grow as a professional. Besides, creating things yourself feels more valuable than relying on ready-made solutions. Now let's go to the Blender. First, I delete the cube and create a sphere. And that's it, Kirby's body is ready. Next, I quickly draw Kirby with grease pencil as a reference. Then, I create a second sphere, add a mirror modifier, and stretch it slightly along the z-axis. This will be the arms. For legs, I use a simple cube, add subdivision, and set it to level 2. Then, I started shaping the form by adding loop cuts and tweaking the points. When the shape was done, I added a mirror modifier and increased the whole size of the model. The final step was sketching the face with grease pencil. After that, the model was fully complete. And here usually begins the most challenging part. Rigging. To be honest, I'm not an expert in rigs. Far from it. So I was lucky that Kirby is a very simple character. First, I created the main body bone at the center of the mesh. Then added the arm and leg bones as children in the armature hierarchy. Next, I parented the rig to the model. To do so, select your mesh in the object mode. Then select the rig. Switch to pose mode, press Ctrl+P and select the bone. I repeat this method for the legs and arms, and the rig is fully attached to the model. Surprisingly, it took less time than I expected. I even made a test walk animation. So, the rig turned out simple, but perfectly functional. To make him look cuter, I painted the model and drew his face with grease pencil. And just like that, Kirby's model and rig are ready. But then, one thing came up. I wanted the final 3D scene to include not just Kirby's body, but the whole environment. And the problem is, I don't know how to make detailed 3D environments at all. This is where my friend, the talented 3D artist Nurse, came to the rescue. We connected over a call and he took care of creating the final 3D environments, as well as preparing shaders for Kirby and Suzanne. After that, without worrying about 3D anymore, I moved on to the next stage, the layout. At this stage, I assemble a basic 3D environment using the storyboard as a guide. First, I place the main objects in the scene. Then I set up the camera, choosing the angle that best shows the scene and the characters' actions. Next, I place the 3D characters in the location as size references. It helps to see in advance how the shot will look and solve the most problems before the long 2D animation process even begins. After finishing the layout, I jumped into rough animation. I've been doing all my 2D work in Blender for the past few years. For me, this whole fan animation was essentially a one big exercise in a classic animation task, the bouncing ball. Kirby's every jump was a mini practice in weight and rhythm, but in a fun way. Kirby's inhale effects were a different story. I remade them several times, creating a few versions, and finally settled on the one inspired by the game, Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland on Game Boy Advance. When I finally moved onto 3D animation, I noticed that I had forgotten to add bones for the toes. Quickly fixed it and also added root bone, which lets me move, rotate and scale the entire skeleton as a single unit. With these adjustments, animating became much easier. So I got to work. I started with the key poses and worked on the timing at the same time. Unfortunately, I couldn't set up IK for the legs, which made things a bit tricky. When I moved the body down, the legs followed along, so I had to do a lot of counter animation to fix their positions relative to the body. I also used the motion paths feature to visualize arcs. Arcs are super important in the animation because they make movements feel natural and believable. Sometimes when a pose didn't quite work in 3D, I would sketch it in 2D first. Being an artist, it's easier for me to draw the pose and then match the 3D rig to it. After a few weeks of work, the rough animation was finally done. And now, finally, we can start cleaning up the animation. In the past, I used to do cleanup entirely by hand. It took a huge amount of time, plus the lines often ended up uneven and inconsistent in thickness. For this project, I decided to try Crisp Pencil Stroke Arc tool. It allows you to create lines and manipulate them like Bezier curves. There is a catch though. Once you finish a line and press enter, it converts into a polyline, and you can't edit it like a curve anymore. I wanted lines that I could easily edit. Turns out, you can convert a line back into a Bezier curve. After conversion, you can once again stretch, duplicate, and control the thickness of each point. Using this method, I managed to clean up the animation in just a couple of days. Then I created the color palette based on the key art I drew at the start of the project. Using that palette, I finished the coloring the animation in a few more days. After that, I started painting the backgrounds. For the backgrounds, I used the composition I had built during the layout stage as a starting point. Then I divided the work into 3 stages. First, I draw the outlines of all the objects and details in the scene. Second, I fill in all the elements with color to immediately see the overall composition. Then, I add shadows, lighting, and small details to make the background look complete and alive. At one point, I felt that the grass looked too flat, so I decided to add more details, taking inspiration from the visual style of the game Animal Crossing. By adding the extra blades of grass and small elements, I made the background more interesting to look at. Once the background was ready, I imported it into Blender. Each layer separately placed at different distances from the camera, and voila, a sense of depth appeared like magic. If I remember correctly, this technique was invented and used by Disney back in the 1960s. It was called the multiplane camera. I used the same method to draw and assemble backgrounds for all of the 2D scenes. Now, all that was left was to wait for Nurse to finish the 3D backgrounds. And looks like he is done. From here on, Nurse will explain how he created the 3D environment.
After Didar explained his idea to me, I collected references and made a list of all the props that we needed. Of course, we only needed the scene from one angle, but I wanted to create props and tools worthy of a full production rather than a one-off project. It was both training and a challenge for me. So I started building the environment from one of the simplest props, the small totem-like sticks. They were very easy to model, but I added one special detail to the material. Every duplicate gets a different random pattern in the center. This helps avoid repetition and adds variety when assembling the environment. This technique is used a lot in games. Next up, plant assets. I started creating a texture atlas for the first plants, modeled several plant variants, and placed them all in front of the camera. That way, I could export various maps and using Photoshop and Substance Designer, paint and texture them. I also created a couple of tileable textures. After the textures were ready, I brought them back into Blender, cut them according to their shapes and modeled them. For the bushes, I took the basic shapes of a cube and a sphere and placed leaves and flowers on top using geometry nodes. Geometry nodes are one of Blender's most powerful tools. they make work much easier. I use geometry nodes to create roads, clouds, and arch-like mountains. Besides these, I also created several types of trees using the same texture and leaf cards as the bushes. After that, I started assembling the scene. I began with the large assets to establish the composition. I can't say I followed any strict rules. I mostly trusted my eye and intuition. Didar initially divided the shot into 3 depth planes, so I tried to keep that structure. At this stage, I added fog using real-time compositing with Z depth and position passes. It gives the scene a nice atmospheric perspective. Then I used plane and the noise texture to make shadows from the clouds. This breaks the flatness and adds interesting variation. Then I created mist-like clouds over the ground using a plane and a shader, which helps to clearly separate each plane. Next I placed grass, also using geometry nodes. After working for a while, I stepped away and came back to adjust the composition with fresh eyes. I added spiral cloud in the background that I prepared earlier, then shaped it to fit the scene. Next came the flowers, again scattered with the geometry nodes. After that, I made a bunch of small tweaks, no new assets, just refining what was already there. Finally, I created the waterfall and added it to the scene. I animated the water and all the clouds to keep everything alive and moving. That's it, the environment is ready. Didar, here you go.
By the way, he also created the shaders for the Susan and Kirby. At the very beginning, I mentioned that I used grease pencil to draw Kirby's faces. Here's how I did it. First, you create a grease pencil object. Then, in draw mode, set it to surface and set the value to 0.01. This way, you can draw any expressions directly on the model. I used this method in other short animations where Kirby sings and dances. Now we wait for the render to finish, and then we can start compositing. Good, next step is compositing. In compositing, my main task was to assemble the scenes and add subtle effects. I added an atmosphere layer to better emphasize the separation of planes and the depth of the shot. Then created shadows for the characters and animated their movements under Kirby and Suzanne. Additionally, I added a few effects on a separate layer so that the Suzanne would have a glowing outline, helping her stand out against the background. Once compositing was finished, I added sound effects, exported everything, and uploaded it to YouTube. After the animation got some views on YouTube, I watched it again and noticed an important mistake. And if you look closely, it becomes very obvious. Let me give you a hint. It turns out I forgot to draw his cheeks. I don't understand how that happened. And if anyone noticed, let's keep it a secret, okay? This is my first time making a video in this format, so I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, and if you have any suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I try to reply to all of them whenever possible. Goodbye, and I hope to see you in my next video sometime.